Well, I would say first, it shouldn't come as any surprise that we're in regular touch with social media platforms. Well, first, we are in regular touch with these social media platforms, and those engagements typically happen through members of our senior staff, but also members of our COVID-19 team. So we are regularly making sure social media platforms are aware of the latest narratives dangerous to public health. That is an example of the kind of information that we are flagging or raising. We've increased disinformation research and tracking within the Surgeon General's office. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook that spread disinformation. That is an example of the kind of information that we are flagging or raising. We're flagging problematic posts for Facebook.
Missouri versus Biden case in the district court, the court explained, quote, if the allegations made by the plaintiffs are true, the present case arguably involves the most massive attack on free speech in United States history, close quote. Court went on to find that the plaintiffs were reasonably likely to succeed on the merits at trial, entered a preliminary injunction. The Fifth Circuit has affirmed. The Supreme Court has taken jurisdiction of the case. Of course, that's all civil litigation. Is any criminal investigation or prosecution of the persons responsible for that activity in the FBI, CISA, and at the White House and their co-conspirators underway in the Civil Rights Division?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with this litigation, but happy to bring your question back.
Thank you. So let me just make sure I understand that. You are not aware of the Missouri versus Biden litigation that is currently being taken up by the United States Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, I'm not, Congressman.
Well, assuming that you're not aware of that, what reason would there be that the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department's leader is unaware of what a United States District Court has described as the most massive attack on free speech in the United States history?
If you could share more of the facts, that could be helpful, Congressman.
Otherwise, you just don't know. Is that correct?
That's correct. Unfortunately, this does not appear to be a case that I'm familiar with.
A federal judge in Louisiana is limiting the Biden administration from contacting social media companies, the judge saying the administration likely violated the First Amendment when it pressured those companies to remove certain posts.
So they took meetings with them. They had email exchanges. But beyond that, when the White House and other government agencies didn't get what they wanted, according to the opinion, they made some not so subtle threats. Like, we're going to have to look at this really closely. We're going to have to look at your immunity under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Maybe we'll have an antitrust meeting. This is something we really need to take a look at.
Essentially, what a lot of these allegations have to do with is the government flagging posts that violate the standards that these social media companies have independently set up. So if they find something that, they're flagging this post and say, hey, they're not explicitly saying you need to take this down. Often there's sort of an implicit implication there, saying, just, bringing this to your attention, and then the social media company can decide independently whether or not that violates their ongoing standards.
Sure, buddy.
But it's a really new area and a really complicated one, and one that there should be close guardrails on to make sure that the government is not overreaching. But the idea that the government can't have any communication with these social media companies, I don't think is really a world that we would want to live in. And the FBI side, it's something I followed really closely, and there's just not a lot of evidence that the FBI was encouraging social media companies to take down posts.
What we found in the files was a sweeping effort to reverse that promise and use machine learning and other tools to turn the internet into an instrument of censorship and social control. Unfortunately, our own government appears to be playing a lead role. We saw the first hints in communications between Twitter executives before the 2020 election, when we read things like flagged by DHS or please see attached report from FBI for potential misinformation. This would be attached to an Excel spreadsheet with a long list of names whose accounts were often suspended shortly after. We learned Twitter, Facebook, Google, and other companies developed a formal system for taking in moderation requests from every corner of government, from the FBI, the DHS, the HHS, DOD, the Global Engagement Center at State, even the CIA. For every government agency scanning Twitter, there were perhaps 20 quasi-private entities doing the same thing, including Stanford's Election Integrity Partnership, NewsGuard, the Global Disinformation Index, and many others, many taxpayer-funded. A focus of this fast-growing network, as Mike noted, is making lists of people whose opinions, beliefs, associations, or sympathies are deemed misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. That last term is just a euphemism for true but inconvenient.
To what degree can the White House, even if that agenda is for ostensibly public health, to what degree can they engage in a pressure campaign on Facebook, Twitter, other social media companies to advance their message, even if their message is backed up by medicine and science? And then afterwards, perhaps more importantly, what kinds of consequences can they imply or otherwise suggest might happen to those who don't listen?
So I think this is a little bit of a corrective, but I clearly feel that in the end, the decision will be refined somewhat because government has to have the right to have its own free speech, to push back when they see things on social media they think are dangerous.
Yeah, and the government would argue we were just colluding, if you want to put it that way, to stop bad information, to getting in the hands of people and threatening their well-being.
You keep wondering, when is America going, and when are Americans going to say, what is wrong with these people? What has happened to this country in the sense of what the Republicans have done to this country? You can take the MAGA judges. You can take the judge down in Louisiana who recently just basically voided the First Amendment of this country. Perhaps voided it.
It's inaccurate, dishonest, and, in a word, dong water.
It is an extraordinarily broad, even radical ruling in many ways, made by one trial judge before a trial and before there was even discovery in the case, listening to two very conservative Republican attorneys general basically putting into the law the conspiracy theory idea that somehow the government's been censoring social media and keeping conservative voices off. This is a potentially very significant threat to the ability to stop election interference.
Yes, this is a Trump-appointed judge, but this judge was confirmed 98-0 by the Senate. Just reading the words in this injunction, a, quote, massive effort by the defendants to suppress speech based on content, those are the judge's words, calling the present case, quote, arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in the United States history, Ellie.
Yeah. It's a dramatic decision by this judge. If you read through it, he's citing to literature and George Washington and Ben Franklin. Here's what really is astonishing to me. This is a conservative ideology that clearly comes through in this decision. It's a conservative political ideology, right? We saw some of the quotes questioning vaccines, questioning masks, conservative talking points. But the ruling itself is the opposite of judicial conservatism. This is one of the most aggressive, far-reaching rulings you'll ever see. What this judge is purporting to do is to micromanage, really, the day-to-day interactions between essentially the entire executive branch, all these agencies that are listed as defendants, and the leading social media companies. And in the actual temporary injunction, the judge basically says, you're not allowed, administration, to talk to these social media companies about any protected free speech except for cybersecurity threats, national security threats, criminal threats. But where's the line? Who's going to police this? This is a judge trying to micromanage the day-to-day regular activities of the entire executive branch.
That's about as Washington, D.C. as it gets.